Today's interview will focus on leadership development from the Natural Step Foundation. Welcome, Karl Henrik, the Natural Steps founder. I would like to start to ask you, when we talk about concept, we immediately start to think about the Natural Steps sustainability principles. Why do a leader of today need to know and understand them?
The reason for that is that the whole game of running business is changing systematically, regardless of our actions or our doings, because of unsustainability. Unsustainability can be perceived as society running deeper and deeper into a funnel of declining resource potential to sustain civilization. And if you are running a business in that system without understanding the game, your risk of being hit by costs for resources, waste management costs, opportunity costs, missed opportunities on the market, the way it will develop, and so forth and so on, is pronounced. And vice versa, if you understand the surrounding system better than your competitors, your chances of making good business increase heavily. This is just a series of words. It doesn't mean anything unless you can define the end game. If you understand sustainability at the end of that funnel, when it opens up again, then you can draw the conclusions. But if you do not know what sustainability is, you cannot draw the right conclusions.
So, can you shortly describe the principles the Natural Steps Foundation?
Yeah, it's a whole framework actually, where we have defined sustainability in a robust way at the strategic level. The reason why you need principles is that the whole issue is entirely complex. Sustainability appears as a series of impacts in economic systems and environmental systems and social systems that are interrelated. But if you understand how to define the end game, then you can do a lot of things that you cannot do without such principles. You can design a stepwise approach whereby you bring your business closer and closer to sustainability while increasing your opportunities on future markets and avoiding costs and problems. B, you can deal with trade-offs. You cannot if you don't know the end game. If you have two different alternatives for an investment, for instance, it very often show up as some advantages in certain aspects and some disadvantages in another aspect. And how can you compare pros and cons for different alternatives if you don't know where you want to go? It is like comparing plague with cholera. And if you choose between evils, you get evil. But if you know the end game, you can evaluate different investment opportunities as stepping stones to eventually get to your goal. Another thing is that you can deal with system boundaries. If you don't know how to define the end game, you don't know what you need to take into account. But if you know exactly how to define the end game, then you can just put yourself in your own position where you are now, hold robust principles for sustainability up in front of you, and then ask yourself the following question. What in the whole world that I need to take into account to meet those criteria do I need to take into account? And the other stuff I can disregard. So you use the end game as your system boundaries. You can do resource potentials for a sustainable company calculable. If you don't know the end game, you cannot calculate the resource potential for it. Another thing is that it is phenomenal to create community and teamwork, to have a shared understanding of the goal. And again, that's what you can get if you have principles like that. And finally, it is a phenomenal way of selecting the tools you need for your transition and informing the tools you need for that transition, and to trash the tools you do not need. But if you don't know the end game, you don't know what tools you will need either. And there are so many tools for sustainable development out there. But you can bring them together into cohesiveness if you know the end game. So all of these reasons are there for any strategic thinker. And you all know it. If you don't know where you want to be, you will end up somewhere else.
Well, I understand if you understand the end game, and then also that you, when you as a CEO see a lot of different types of tools and principles in the market, how could I value the right tool for my company?
If you know the end game, the framework that we have developed works in the following way. By use of those principles, you outline your challenges, your problems, your assets today. So you evaluate today in relation to where you want to be, not in relation to what others are doing, which you hear all the time when people talk about best in class, which is their dream. We don't even know if best in class is good. Mostly it's not. Or relating what you want to do in relation to what you did before. For instance, a certain recycling rate. But if you know the end game, then you can design your transition. What is it we need to do to comply with those principles? And once that's comprised into a business plan, now is the time to select the tools you need. Why bother about tools if you don't know where you want to be? But if you know exactly what you want to do, develop a business plan accordingly, now is the time to select the tools you need for that transition.
And as I see, you have now been working with these principles for 20 years. And if you look at the mirror and think about these 20 years, what is the reflection of the development of the natural step?
Well, each time we have applied those principles in top managements, it changes completely their mindset, first of all. They move away from nitty-gritty, piecemeal changes at the small scale with a growing feeling of being out of control, to bridging a gap, bridging a very clear and well-defined gap to where they want to be, which is a much higher strategic dimension, which is more satisfactory. It changes the way they purchase materials, it changes the way they develop new products, it changes the way by which they inform their own vision, core values and mission into a sustainability context. It changes the way they go about management systems. Everything becomes much easier if you have a well-defined goal. And now you can merge health and security and quality and all those kinds of systems into one and the same overriding business program. So it's a way of being smarter, more effective, and a bit lazy at the same time. Because if you do it right from up front, you create less work for yourself in the long run. If you get going with a scattered comprehension of the game, it's very easy to begin, and it gets more and more heavy the longer you go.
So if you also look back and see the front runners of today, maybe they also are in another position as it was for some years ago. And where do you find the front runners? What are they doing?
The wonderful thing is that you find them in all sectors, in all businesses. There are front runners in agriculture, forestry, technology development, energy sector, service sectors. There are forerunners in the banking system, forerunners on the policy arena. You find forerunners everywhere, like small lighthouses that are creating a new momentum into a new world together. And they also have begun to connect. So now those forerunners are beginning to run their own agendas. Where they didn't find support before, it is today easier to find support. And this is happening as an exponential curve. So if you just take one example, photovoltaics. Last year, more photovoltaics were created in the world than accumulated all other years before that. So this is an exponential curve which is growing faster than a traditional exponential curve. And the same goes for wind power and a number of new technologies. The point is that we don't see that exponential curve so much because you are still multiplying relatively small numbers with 2. But when you have done that for a while, then you really see change. Layered along the same historical development, we have still an exponential growth of the traditional growth paradigm, which destroys the world, which gives a lot of people a loss of faith. They have a feeling that this will go to hell in the long run, in spite of all our efforts that seem futile in this context. But the point is that the old paradigm is growing from relatively large numbers, so we see that. And eventually, if we just wait a little bit longer, the growing curve of the new technology, the clean technologies, the new cultures will influence heavily the old paradigm. And this is how all paradigm shifts before us have happened in human history. So we don't actually have any reason to give up or feel that we don't have a reason for faith. There is an exponential growth of good stuff, and the role models are on all arenas.